Some really interesting things here. I mean, I really don't know if he would want to stand and bang with someone like Ilia Topuria. Okay, so today we are going to be reacting to Charles Oliveira's sparring. Let's go ahead and get right into it. We're going to be looking for things that he could probably do against Ilia Topuria for their matchup that's going to be going down later this year. If you guys are enjoying the review on the sparring footage that we've been doing recently on this channel, make sure you guys subscribe, leave a like, and leave a comment, and tell me what fighter you guys want to watch on this channel. Let's go ahead and see this sparring footage from none other than Charles some really interesting things here. I mean, I really don't know if he would want to stand and bang with someone like Ilia Topuria. Like, he just stand and bang against this guy. I mean, this guy obviously isn't Ilia Topuria, but you do not want to stand and bang with someone like Ilia Topuria. Go for tit for tat. Not something you want to do. So that teep is something that I want him to do against Ilia Topuria, someone that does have like a boxing stance, like this guy in the blue. He does have like a traditional boxing stance, you know? And this is something that we could probably see in the octagon that's actually going down right now, like a traditional boxer versus Charles Oliveira, a guy that has a lot of length, you know? He could probably use some of those teeps and some of those kicks to try to keep, you know, a guy with a boxing stance like Ilia Topuria at bay. You know, just making him walk into powerful strikes. And those teeps, they might look like he's really not doing much, but they hurt like a motherfucker. Guy here in the blue, I mean, he has like a boxing stance. It's not as bladed as Ilia Topuria's, but it is a bladed boxing stance.
Minuto.
I mean, the more bladed a fighter is, the more open you are to kicks. You know, Charles Oliveira has a lot of length. He has really long legs. And he's a little tall for the lightweight division.
Segundos.
A lot of clinching here. Oh, the knees. The knees, you know, it's something that I picked up from Charles Oliveira whenever he did fight against Justin Gaethje. He landed some pretty insane knees on Justin Gaethje. If one of those knees were to land on Ilia Topuria, that could be a big game changer. Found some more sparring footage from Charles Oliveira. A little bit more of technique here rather than actual them hard sparring. Now this is very interesting because Charles Oliveira does like to fight with a high guard. And if he just stays there trying to block shots instead of trying to parry and catch a lot of the shots coming in from Ilia Topuria, I think that he might get caught with something pretty heavy. Ilia Topuria does have a heavy-ass jab. He likes to throw them stiff jabs, right? And if Charles Oliveira just tries to take him on the guard, I eventually do think that one of them is going to land flush and it's going to start doing some damage to Charles Oliveira. I think that he should try at least to parry and catch and slip some jabs, right? Because, I mean, from what I've seen in the footage that we did yesterday on Ilia Topuria, he throws everything with the intent to literally knock your ass out, even the jabs, right? Now, something that I think that Charles Oliveira does pretty well is trying to bait his opponents into becoming offensive so that Charles Oliveira can find openings to counter. Now, if he's able to do that against Ilia Topuria, I feel like that's probably going to be his best bet at him looking for a knockout. Not saying that it's going to happen because that's easier said than done, obviously. But I think that he could look eventually, for that opportunity for him to land something pretty heavy on Ilia Topuria. As we all know, Charles Oliveira has sat down a lot of opponents before. And if he's able to find some of those openings, who's to say that, Charles Oliveira can't put Ilia Topuria away? The main thing right now concerning me about Charles Oliveira is that he just doesn't catch or parry any jabs. And like the jab is the most important punch to try to defend against because every gym in the world, literally every gym in the world, is trained or trains their fighters to start their combinations off a jab. And that's just the one thing that Charles Oliveira just doesn't do. And in boxing, if you could do a good job at defending against the jab, you're able to control at least some of the output of your opponent. And that's just something that we don't really talk about in MMA. That's more of a boxing, not fundamental, but that's more of a boxing concept, where we do have a lot of boxers that try to control their opponent's output by defending against the jab well, whether that's slipping. Yes, slipping is a form of defense, and as well as catching and parrying the jab, because that's limiting your opponent's sequence into them becoming or creating momentum so they can land their own offensive scheme. And that's just the one thing that really worries me about Charles Oliveira, is that he's decent on the movement, right, when it comes to his feet, but just not really doing much to defend against the jab is the number one thing that scares me for him. Everything else that Charles Oliveira does in terms of macro movement into baiting his opponents to become offensive is pretty good. And I think the main thing that works for Charles is that he's like a pretty tall guy for the division. So that's going to be his main attribute coming into this fight when he fights Ilia Topuria. Right here, he walks down guys that are bigger than him, by like in a body sense, like in terms of girth, pause. But he does a pretty good job at walking them down, and how he does that is by literally walking forward, not really putting pressure in terms of output, but just always having that threat of just being in front of his opponent. Who these random people are. But those teeps, man, those teeps are the number one thing that I think could be the main difference between fighting someone like Ilia Topuria. It's just using his length. Some nice, decent switch hitting there, right? We really don't see Charles Oliveira do a lot of switch hitting, but that was some pretty interesting movements there he did whenever he switched from the orthodox to the southpaw stance. Not really something you do see in MMA fighters. I think that Peter Yan's like one of the few guys that I've actually have successful UFC in terms of like fighters that are really good at striking. But that's really hard to do in MMA. Like mastering one stance is freaking difficult to do. Like imagine trying to move from orthodox to southpaw. That's incredibly hard. So I think this is just a repeat from that other video. But yeah, just to keep things kind of short, the number one thing that I am seeing from Charles Oliveira, and I think that could be, the big thing coming into the fight with Ilia Topuria, is fighting with his length. Those kicks, those teeps, they eventually will do, they eventually will get to Ilia Topuria, especially if he starts implementing those in the beginning of the couple of first rounds. Now, obviously, that's easier said than done. Ilia Topuria is a very tough guy, and he is going to pressure Charles Oliveira. How I picture this fight going is Ilia Topuria taking the center of the octagon and Charles Oliveira fighting on the outside. And this is going to be, pretty much a fight on who's able to have the best position. These both guys are championship level fighters, and at the end of the day, what separates the great from good fighters is decision making. And obviously, right now, if you ask me personally, I feel from like a macro sense, uh, Ilya Taporia probably has the upper hand, but it's really hard to count out Charles Oliveira. I feel like the main thing that could be the difference maker is the micro adjustment. In terms of having a longer guard, able to defend against a jab for Charles Oliveira, and whether or not Ilya Taporia is able to defend well against long strikes and being patient and finding openings to get in the inside. But that's pretty much it. If you guys would like to see us, or see me review Ilya Taporia, I just made that video yesterday, so I'm gonna leave a link to that down in the description below. But if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you guys leave a like, subscribe to the channel. As always, it's a pleasure. Peace out and have a good one.